Today, we are going to talk about the extremely hot potato issue of the so-called scandal that has blown up in Ukraine, and of course, the unprecedented, at least in wartime, demonstrations that we've seen. I'll be talking to Alya Shandra, who is editor-in-chief at Euro Maidan Press. She has a background in environmental science and NGOs. During the original Euromaidan revolution, Alya Shandra launched an independent media outlet called Euromaidan Press, and that project was fueled by her interest in how she could help Ukraine permanently move beyond a post-communist, post-colonial country and evolve to becoming a free and democratic society that tackles corruption and nepotism. And of course, those issues are once more center stage, and that's what we're going to talk about. Before we jump in, thank you to everybody who supports the channel through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, etc. Everyone who adds comments, shares the videos, likes, and of course is subscribed. It massively helps to make sure that these videos and these very important voices reach a wider audience. Alya, I'm so grateful you could come on at short notice.
Thanks for having me.
It seems that Zelensky has had a little Maidan moment of his own, and even though he's rapidly backtracking and almost instantly seems to have caved into the protests, nonetheless, it's quite an extraordinary spectacle, given that there is a full-scale war on.
Yes, indeed, these are the first large-scale protests against Zelensky since Russia's full-scale invasion. And that just goes to show how important this is to society. And I think this is something that Zelensky and his entourage never expected. And probably because they don't really know the society over which they claim to rule.
And so we can give a little bit of background to the audience. What is the controversial anti-corruption law? How does it significantly change the situation that was there before? And what organizations does it affect? Does it pertain to?
Right. To understand this truly, we need to go a little bit back, and I'll get a little philosophical here, because a precondition to any democratic society is the division of power. And since Aristotle times, this has been a feature of a republic, that the power is divided into executive, legislative, and judicial power, and they balance each other. And when that doesn't happen, then society lives as a monarchy, where power is consolidated under one authoritarian leader. So, throughout Ukraine's independence, there has been no real division of power. It has all been concentrated, and there were no checks and balances, no true checks and balances, really. And this is one of the reasons why power got increasingly consolidated in the hands of any elected Ukrainian leaders, which led to such bad things as corruption, usurpation of power, political repressions, even political prisoners, oligarchy, etc., etc. All of these things that prevent a society from becoming functioning and democratic. And of course, Euromaidan in 2014, it was when Ukrainians it expressed the will of Ukrainians to live in a proper functioning democracy where everybody is accountable to the rule of law. So as a response to this request of society, demand of society, an anti-corruption reform was launched after 2014, after the victory of the Euromaidan revolution, with the goal of actually creating this division of power to keep the authorities in check, to make sure that if it's written in the law that you can't steal, that applies also to those in power. And as part of this anti-corruption reform, agencies were launched. And some of them, NABU, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and SAPO, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. These are part of this anti-corruption system that with the goal of keeping the authorities in check and investigating high-profile corruption cases. So they were launched. They had problems. They developed. They underwent many stages, but in the end, they started actually delivering results. They started investigating the top corrupts. And gradually, they started reaching closer and closer to Zelensky's circle. And that's when it got nasty. Because just 2 days ago, out of the blue, a law was dragged through Ukrainian parliament under the guise of another law that would effectively put these two institutions, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, under the control of the General Prosecutor, who is appointed by the president. So we have a situation where these independent anti-corruption institutions that were called to prosecute, investigate the top corrupt, they are suddenly put under the control of a politically appointed prosecutor general. So, and it's for me, it's been really heartening to see these protests because over all of these times of Ukrainian reforms, this topic, this anti-corruption infrastructure, how complicated it is to set it up, all the power struggles within, all the conflicts, all these things that are impossible to track. Nobody was interested in them. They were like absolutely obscure for international audiences, for Ukrainian audiences. But this concept of a functioning republic, of a functioning democracy, it still proved to be very intuitively comprehensible to Ukrainians. And it turned out to be so important that they spontaneously flooded Ukrainian cities. They just raided our postal delivery offices for cardboard to make signs. And they made 1 million hilarious signs to protest this absurdity. Signs that say, "My mother taught me not to steal. I can't believe I still have to protest this shit." And a million tweets, really witty tweets on
Don't push
cardboard
the
signs.
horses is, I think, one of
Don't
our
push the
favorites. Yeah.
horses. Yeah, freedom runs faster. Don't push the horses, they kick back. Yeah, all of these hilarious tweets are now embodied on pieces of cardboard. And Gen Zs and even younger people, teenagers starting from 16, 17 years old, and even younger, they are out on the streets and they're demanding that the independence of anti-corruption bodies are upheld. And make no mistake, this is not about the defense of specific people. It's not about the defense of even these institutions. Nobody thinks that they're perfect and they like work perfectly, but it's about the principle of the separation of power. It's about the principle of checks and balances and about a democracy being possible only when those in power are accountable to the law. And it's been, I think Zelensky hasn't expected this. They thought that they could just drag it through, but they crossed the red line. They crossed the red line that is fundamental for Ukrainian society. It's a post-Euromaidan agreement that this is our European path. It is irreversible. Ukrainian society was ready to forgive many, many missteps of Zelensky's during war. But this is something, a red line that cannot be forgiven.
And that's interesting. We'll come to separation of powers because I think that's a kind of interesting theoretical and legal problem there. But there is another aspect to this that these organizations weren't just set up under internal pressure and in the post-Maidan environment. They were set up also with some external pressure from foreign partners who are insisting these agencies and organs be given independent status and come into existence. They are critical as well to the integration path with the EU. So whereas one could understand the government maybe tinkering with them or creating new agencies in addition or trying to improve the situation, it seems that actually having these independent bodies is critical to Euro integration. And of course, Euromaidan is called Euromaidan for a reason. It's because the incumbent ruler at the time sought to block that path of closer integration with Europe.
Indeed, the creation of these agencies, it was part of the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement that was signed. It was one of the preconditions for Ukraine's visa-free regime and basically path towards the EU. And it's no coincidence that, as European Pravda reported yesterday, that the EU was hatching a plan to fast-track Ukraine's EU accession, bypassing the Hungarian veto. They hatched a plan to do it, and they were ready to face 3 years of legal proceedings for it. But this was exactly that. It was supposed to happen just last week. And for some inexplicable reason, Zelensky decided to launch this offensive on independent institutions. And it was preceded by other very troubling instances. For instance, the raid on and accusations against Vitaly Shabunin, an anti-corruption activist. Also, the failure to appoint the legally appointed head of the Bureau of Economic Security. All of these things, they were part of one escalating tendency of president and his entourage that for some reason decided that they can do anything now and get away with it.
It's interesting, and the separation of powers, I think, is actually quite a tricky issue, isn't it? Because there's a clear separation between these agencies and the state, the legislature, and so on, the executive in particular. But also there is a certain separation between the prosecutions that they are encouraging and actually carrying out those prosecutions. I mean, this is quite an interesting separation, isn't it? Because not only is the obvious one of them being independent, but there's both risks and benefits to this. You know, you don't want the people who are putting the cases together to necessarily be the ones that are going through the entire prosecution process, because that could, create conflicts of interest. But at the same time, they could suggest all sorts of cases, but then don't necessarily have control over the speed, the pace, the intensity of those prosecutions, or even the structure of those prosecutions. What are the kind of problems, even before this proposed change in the law, to actually making these kind of organizations work?
Well, the major obstacle to actually bringing the corrupts to justice was actually the presence of a court that would deal with this. So the creation of a high anti-corruption court, where independent experts were involved in the selection process of judges. It was considered one of the major milestones on the path of actually creating this functioning system. And it delivered its first results, actually, it's prosecution of very high-profile cases. So an independent judiciary, and specifically this anti-corruption court, it was quite central, as I understand it. And I think this is really the major linchpin in the system that needs to be upheld.
And Zelensky's reaction is kind of interesting. To put it in the context, you're talking about there being some, I would say, authoritarian tendencies, but there's some backsliding sort of going on in various moves made over the last couple of months. But at the same time, there seems to have been some sort of progress in certain things. So the Zelensky administration is getting a little bit better at talking Trump's language and the language that's more amenable to, his entourage. There seems to be some progress there. The administration seems to be kind of learning a little bit when it comes to optics and comms. They just had the reshuffle. And the promotion of the new prime minister, not only female, but also comes, from a background of civic society, and that was broadly welcomed. So on the one hand, you've got these sort of signals that the administration is starting to learn, perhaps, and then you've got this, which seems to be an extraordinary, almost panicked misstep. How do you explain this?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Trump, because many anti-corruption activists are saying that the U.S. withdrawing from, or appearing to withdraw from its active position in caring about Ukraine's progress and caring about its anti-corruption institutions. It was a signal to Zelensky that if Texas steals from the Texans, perhaps it can just keep stealing under this Trump administration. So I think it was perceived as a major signal that they really can do anything that they want. Regarding optics, I would really it's troubling to understand that this law, it was voted through. They got more than 250 votes for it, and on a just a handful of MPs voted against it. And for civil society, it was especially distressing to see candidates who were perceived as candidates from civil society. For instance, Tamila Tasheva, a Crimean Tatar representative, a co-founder of Crimea SOS NGO, she voted for the law. And Mustafa Jamilev, a legendary Crimean Tatar leader, he also voted for the law. for this law to got the anti-corruption agency. So I think it's a tricky question of Ukraine's progress, evolution past the post-Soviet patronage system, where that is based on personal loyalty above everything, into something that is more rule-based, into something that is where the individual players in the political system put the greater good above their personal interests. I think we're not at the stage yet. And this vote, it just showed how fragile this progress has become. It also showed the great chasm between the people in politics, the people in this parliament, the SBU that was raiding these anti-corruption agencies to produce really very superficial evidence, so-called evidence
Well,
to
traffic
accuse,
violations, quite a
yeah,
few of them seem to
traffic
be nothing to
violations,
do
and
with.
really old. They attempted to present them as riddled with Russian influence, but they did not manage to find the evidence for this. Really, they made 70 raids and only 5 cases produced, and 3 were traffic violations. So this is not the picture that they were trying to present Russian influence. It was absolutely unsupported by the evidence. And just, this huge chasm between what society is expecting, what society is dreaming about. Well, all of these young people, the country that they're dreaming about, just look at the youngsters on the streets. They're like 20 years old. And they dream about a country where everybody is accountable to the law. And compare this to the MPs in parliament. Just yesterday, civil society activists that are voting to gut these independent institutions. So I think it just highlights that there was a maturity test to be passed by Zelensky, by the politicians, and they did not pass it. But I think that Ukrainian society did, because it did not let this slide. It went out on the street and made Zelensky listen. And they're just they're influencing politics. Active society is influencing politics. This is no longer a passive post-Soviet country. This is a country that cares about its future. And that is very encouraging, although the politicians are disappointing.
And it's interesting, isn't it? He seems to be relenting. Of course, we have to wait and see what the replacement legislation actually looks like, and whether they're going to try and do the same thing but via other routes, or whether they're going to genuinely relent. But it's the big open question is whether this is power grab, a conscious power grab, part of a strategy, or whether it's just a sort of hasty cover up because, these anti-corruption groups are getting close to people who he might not necessarily want to be implicated in these, or simply ineptitude. Or is it possible that all of these things are kind of going on in parallel? And the fact that he seems to be responsive to this societal pressure kind of suggests that maybe it's not part of a systemic authoritarian power grab.
Well, um, I think it's part of the evolution of a post-Soviet society where you could rely only on your close circle. Um, Only the people close to you can be trusted because there's really nothing larger to consolidate the nation, if that makes sense. Because like during the Soviet Union, nobody really believed in the Soviet ideas. And you could only trust your close circle. So like the patronage politics, I think it's a result of this authoritarian trauma, so to speak. And let's just recall Zelensky's path to power. This is really a tragic comedy that's unfolding here. So he campaigned in 2019 as an outsider of the system, and he's the Servant of the People TV show that was so instrumental in getting him elected. It showed him the final scenes that he is in the Verkhovna Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, and he's just with a machine gun and he's killing all of the corrupt MPs because he's protesting against a system of cronyism, a system of corruption. And look at him 6 years later. He has become the embodiment of the system that he wanted to destroy. And to understand how we got from this spot to this spot, we need to understand that when he entered parliament, he took all of his pals with him from Kvartal 95. And this was partly because he didn't trust any of the political figures that were left after President Poroshenko. Of course, this is his mortal enemy. His whole campaign was built on demonizing Poroshenko, a little bit like Trump in the United States, right? So, of course, he had to get rid of all of the old guard, and he brought in the new guard, and those were his associates, his pals from his comedy club, his entertainment business associates. And these people turned out to be loyal but highly incapable. And Ukraine suffered greatly for these mistakes because, for instance, his a childhood neighbor and co-owner of Kvartal 95, the former head of the security service, Ivan Bakanov, he messed up so many things. It was partly based thanks to him that Ukraine faced the full-scale Russian invasion infested with Russian moles in its security service, and partly thanks to him that the invasion and the occupation of the south of Ukraine happened so quickly. Prioritizing personal loyalty over capability and capacity and competence, and because of this fundamental distrust of outsiders, of anybody outside your circle. I think this is part of what made this phenomenon possible. And it's a bitter irony and a tragic comedy that he is now the villain that he fought against in his TV show. It's a Yanukovych moment for Zelensky.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because your publication, Kiev Independent, and many others that very much align with, say, is sort of Euromaidan, a revolution of dignity, values, and spirit, has reacted in an extremely strong, powerful manner. One almost might say, and the Kiev Independent sort of been screaming these sort of headlines. I would almost say acting like an activist as opposed to journalistically. Is there a risk there of not being seen as impartial, as not putting forward solutions, but rather being in some ways almost hyperbolic, comparing to Yanukovych? I mean, Yanukovych beat up protesters. He brought snipers in. I mean, that was a real authoritarian regime in tooth and claw. Is it not hyperbolic to say that Zelensky is at that point or becoming that thing?
Well, I'm just quoting Daria Kolenyuk, who is the co-founder of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, an organization founded in 2013 to battle Yanukovych's corruption. That was her quote unquote, Daria Kolenyuk, that Zelensky is having a Yanukovych moment. Of course, we can't compare them because Yanukovych chose to kill the protesters. Zelensky has listened to them on the streets. And while we'll believe it when we see it, this law that has been adopted, these are two different worlds, of course. So, we're not saying that Zelensky has become Yanukovych, but we're saying that he is having a moment because he campaigned against creating untouchables, and he is now protecting untouchables because they are the untouchables in his inner circle. So, well, of course, Yanukovych's government, it was very vividly authoritarian. It killed its own people for protesting in the streets. It turned its back on Euro integration. Here we have a much more softer option, but we're still seeing the same fundamentals there. The fundamentals of a inner circle of friends that is above the law. We're seeing that Zelensky is still playing by this game.
And it's what's it actually going to do in the context of the war? And this is where, maybe I'll put a controversial question here. Ukraine is stuck between potentially two hostile regimes. And I'm not even talking about China here. This is the Kremlin in Moscow and Washington, because Washington has been, until recently, extremely hostile in its language and posture towards Ukraine, putting the onus, the blame for the war on Ukraine, which of course is ludicrous and not on the aggressor. How is this going to play? And should we have some awareness that Ukraine is surrounded by hostile enemies? It's also surrounded by a Europe which is slowly waking up. I don't think has not fully woken up to the need to support Ukraine. So this is a point of extreme existential risk.
Oh, exactly. And it's basically the um, insider accounts of European officials that responded to these news of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. They were just incredulous. They could not understand like what is happening. And the signals that were trickled down from these officials, they indicated that Europe would continue supporting Ukraine because it is it's their security concern. It's a security concern to be protected from Russia. But for Ukraine, there's a great difference between being a buffer zone for the European Union and being part of this European family of nations. European family of nations where its citizens have a chance at a dignified life. And this is precisely the reason why we're fighting against Russia. We don't want to become part of the Russian world where your dignity means nothing. We want to become part of the world where people have a chance, any person has a chance to be happy and successful in life because there is a rule of law. And it is for this that Ukraine is fighting to defend its land. We don't want to become Russia. Becoming Russia is simply terrible. So and this makes the step doubly just suicidal for Zelensky because it undermines this high moral ground for supporting Ukraine. It undermines I mean, our readers are flooding our newsrooms, like asking, like, how could we support Ukraine now? Could you just explain us what is going on? Why did he make the step? Nobody could understand why Zelensky is just shaking this high moral ground under Ukraine's feet, because it was really a black and white story until now. Okay, not truly black and white, but it was very clear that Ukraine is on the side of the good. Right now, it's become not so clear.
And of course,
And
those who are really engaged will see these protests and are saying, look, this actually is proof that Ukraine is democracy and it has democratic spirit. So those, I think, who are at the core of the pro-Ukraine activist community are looking at this and say, here's the proof we needed that Ukraine is on the right side, and that actually there's a positive silver lining in here. But there do seem to be a lot of foreigners who equate Ukraine's fight and think of what people are fighting for as being Zelensky and his government to an extent. They're conflating rule of law with the administration. They're conflating Ukraine with its leader. And I can see why he's charismatic. We want to project a sort of Churchillian figure onto him. But we have to remember, Churchill was dismissed from office before the Second World War was ended. So people at that time were able to distinguish between the interests of the state and leaders. It seems perhaps that many in the West, including pro-Ukraine activists, are having a really hard time distinguishing between fighting for rule of law and, injecting, I would almost say, a kind of hero worship onto their perception of Ukraine.
well, that's the problem with with creating heroes. You eventually find out that they're just mortals. And I guess this hero image of Zelensky at the start of the invasion, it's now um playing a joke on him because people are understanding that he's not perfect and he's not the mm, valiant hero, perfect hero that he appeared to be at the start.
I guess no
Um,
Ukrainians thought he was either. I've never spoken to a
no,
Ukrainian who
Ukrainians did
puts him
not
on a
think that he
pedestal
was.
like that.
No, no. Well, I think it was international media that created this image, yes. And well, of course, he stayed in Kiev after the war. There were a lot of good steps that he made. He was the communications at the start of the war of Zelensky and everybody and his team. They were quite good actually for consolidating the nation. But I mean, over these 3 years, the problems are growing. They're not being solved, and of course, this the loss of internal cohesion. Um, um, it's also chipping away at trust. So I suppose that like after these events, Zelensky has lost a lot of trust, but he has not lost legitimacy. He's still president, and he is shown to be responsive to the people. It's not like he's ignoring them. The protests are impossible to ignore. So in this, of course, we have to acknowledge that this is it's a positive step. But I think that the public trust and that he enjoyed it will be greatly shaken.
And it's interesting as well because for many who are looking at this and haven't really paid any attention to internal Ukrainian politics or necessarily even talked that much with Ukrainians, this might have come from out of the blue. This is a real shock. But actually, is it not the case that there have been pent-up frustrations with, not just the administration, but officials, the slow pace of progress, the ongoing whiff of, various corruption at various levels, and dare I say it, the figure of Yermak, who is widely seen as something of a blocker, a gatekeeper to the administration, slowing things down, not necessarily getting the best people into the best roles.
Well, exactly. I mean, these are the first protests since the full-scale invasion, but that doesn't mean that everything was good in Ukraine. Of course, there are a lot of problems that need solving. And basically, it was the consensus, societal consensus that, we have to solve this big problem first, and then we have to defeat Russia first, and then we'll figure it out in our own country. We'll figure out how to reform our own country afterwards. But I mean, this was just a red line. And of course, there are a lot of questions to Zelensky, a lot of questions to Ukraine's effectiveness under these wartime conditions. But I mean, so far, society has been so consolidated and united on the main goal that they were ready to forgive all of these minor trespasses until now.
Well, the last area, and this is much more of a speculative one, but we know that Russia's been mounting, well, not just mounting through Yanukovych, many institutions of the state were penetrated by Russian assets, and it's been a tremendous job, both in the long war and in the full-scale war, to root those out, and that's a kind of ongoing process. But it's not inconceivable that Russia might try to infiltrate anti-corruption organizations because that would be a great way to, demoralize and undermine trust in the state by creating false accusations, for instance. Although it seems in this instance Zelensky has created, the trouble for himself. This scandal is maybe brought on himself. But it's not inconceivable that Russian information operations not only will jump on this and try and use this situation to create a negative image, but they may also have active measures to try to penetrate and corrupt the anti-corruption groups themselves.
Well, everything is possible, but right now, I mean, if we take a look at the bots that are active under the protest, because like there are bots by comments on social media, you can understand what the line of attack is of the protests, and they're being discredited in several ways. So, and I think one line of attack is probably related to the administration of the president, and it's about just demonizing the anti-corruption activists themselves, that they're good for nothings, they just eat grant money and destabilize society. They should be doing something totally else, just trying to discredit these anti-corruption activists. And also like discrediting the protesters themselves, like, oh, they don't even know who they're defending. They haven't even read the law. And they should be protesting for other things. For instance, why aren't they protesting against no fixed terms for mobilization? Why aren't they solving this? And they're trying to like divert attention to other sensitive topics. Oh, why aren't they protesting against forced mobilization of Ukrainians? Why aren't they protesting against fixed terms for mobilization? So, like Russians, they will always use, and maybe not even Russians, but like the administration and the president, I'm sure that they also have their own bot farms. And of course, this network of anonymous Telegram channels, they always use some weak spots of society to divide people, and it's happening now too. We see that Russia is using the situation with the protests, but so far it's not. They're just too massive, too spontaneous, too genuine to really be diverted.
And
Yeah.
to conclude, this, debacle may be cleaned up in some sense internally, and we'll know more over the coming week or two. What can be done to get the international narrative back on track? Because whereas there may be a degree of hyperbole in internal media, we've also, talked about the propensity for international media to look for martyrs and victims, to look for sort of villains and heroes, and to twist narratives in very unhelpful ways. And I have to say, the international media is already doing that. How can we, recover the narrative to, supporting Ukraine, winning the war? This is the most important issue, as it were.
Right, of course. Um, I suppose we need to stress that Ukraine is not perfect. No country is perfect, and Ukraine is not perfect, but it is precisely why Ukrainians want to make their country democratic, because democratic countries have the best chance of building a good life for their citizens. And this is what is happening now on the streets. Ukrainians are coming out because Ukraine is a functioning democracy, because they care about their country and because they want their country to become a society under the rule of law. It shows that their desire for European integration, it's very ingrained, it's internalized. They feel themselves as Europeans because this is so important for them. The rule of law, the separation of powers, the concept of justice. And these are, I mean, try to imagine Russians or Belarusians coming out for these things. It's really unthinkable, but it's so important for Ukrainians that they're willing to come out amid a war, amid all of these other problems. They're willing to come out to defend these values, and this shows really that they Ukraine will keep trying until it gets it right because the people care, and there can be no perfect politicians. I think any of us living in any country, they understand this. But we do see that Ukrainians as a society find democratic progress very, very important. And it is them that are fighting for a better life. It's not Zelensky fight. They're not fighting for Zelensky. They're fighting for their future. And they see their future in Europe. And this is something that we need to remember, understand. We're supporting not Zelensky. We're not supporting his politicians. We're not supporting the MPs in parliament. We're supporting the Ukrainians. And the and the promise of a better life that opened with them with the Euromaidan revolution.
And should we?
They deserve to be in Europe, and they're dying for it. And I mean, are we going to betray them because their politicians are not perfect?
And should we perhaps sort of maybe put the brakes on the international media, some of whom have now started quoting, I would say, people who are themselves controversial, calling Zelensky a dictator, calling for him to be removed. That seems to me a step which could seriously damage the war effort, damage international contributions and support for Ukraine, confuse activists, but also fall into the trap of other people, highly dubious people, with their sort of own partisan intentions. And let's face it, I mean, for many, many months, just until recently, the Trump, I was going to call it regime, the Trump administration has been trying to discredit and unseat Zelensky precisely because that was the core strategy from Moscow. So should we be a little bit sort of careful here, especially with the narratives that end up in the international media that can very dramatically distort these things?
I think that if Zelensky rolls back the law and makes conclusions, then we can start undoing the headlines. But so as far as he remains sensitive and susceptible to international coverage and what people are saying about him, I think that we should say it like it is. So, of course, Zelensky, roll back the law and then we'll just go back to normal.
Well, we're definitely doing a follow up on this story as it unfolds, and hopefully Zelensky has been shocked out of his sort of let's
Comfort
say
zone.
hubristic approach to this, and
Yeah.
seen that the spirit of Maidan is still alive and well and extremely powerful. Anya, thank you so much for coming on the channel to help bring a little bit of light into this I would say, difficult to understand story.
Thank you.